Okay, parked in the school pickup line again. So, with a small second person. So one of the great points that was brought up this morning on the discussion of the doctrine of election was that if we are going to live by and believe God and Scripture, we need to believe all of it. And there's something that occurs quite often in Scripture called an antinomy. I'm curious to know how many people on here know what antinomy means and know why it's super important for us to be aware of and to discuss. Vote, please.
Okay, so an antinomy is something that appears to be contradictory, but is not actually contradictory. I'll show you the most common.
Okay, there's many different scriptures you can use to show this, but the most common antinomy that we see is between evangelism versus the sovereignty of God.
Okay, so looking back at the scripture verses that I just shared, we clearly have some that show the importance of sharing the gospel, and we clearly have some that show that God is ultimately sovereign over salvation. The apparent contradiction is going to come conflict. We have people that say, what's the point of sharing the gospel if God is ultimately sovereign? And yet there's verses that share the importance of the gospel when it comes to salvation. And that we have people that turn salvation into something that is a person's choice or response, which leads you off into a sort of works-based salvation rather than God's sovereign will. And these kind of conflicts are why it's so important to not take anything out of context and, zoomed in, and to why it's so important to use the entirety of Scripture. Now, there's one other place in the New Testament that, in my opinion, resolves that apparent contradiction beautifully. Now, I've never been to seminary, and I don't claim to know everything or even close to everything about Scripture. So yes, God is the one who ultimately works the miracle of salvation in our hearts, but the method of working that miracle is we humans preaching the gospel.